interest form. So you can just hang on to that for now, but you can obviously always get in touch with us if you're interested in taking part in research. We know for lots of people that's maybe not the top of your priority list when you leave today. So this form is just basically if you're happy for us to approach you about any of the projects you'll hear about this afternoon, just for you to put your contact details on there and to hand them in to Claire, Olivia, or any of us at the end of the day. That would be great. And one other thing I wanted to mention was that for me, one of the sort of it seems like such an important thing that comes out of this support group is obviously people connecting and meeting with them. You mentioned earlier that a few of our different couples had got together and organised a trip away to Hastings, and they've all given me their permission to share this very nice photo of that weekend. And I just wanted to mention that Liz, who's in that photo, second on the left, and I might be able to persuade you to stand up now, Neil May, would be happy, if anyone else would like to think about organising a trip with people nearby in a local area, Liz has kindly offered to sort of help coordinate and swap tips with anyone, and we'll be happy for you to get in touch with her about that, so please do find her after the meeting if you are interested in that. And then our first presentation of the afternoon is going to be our support group member, Doug Banks. Doug has been involved with the support groups for a number of years and has been involved in lots of different research and awareness raising, and recently featured in the BBC article that you will have seen in the BBC Well newsletter, talking about work-related changes, which obviously with the early age of onset of PCA, I know many of you would have dealt with changes at work and relating to PCA, and he's really kindly agreed to have sharing conversations, some of his experience with Seb. So I'm going to hand over to him now, and we'll have some time for questions for both of them. So thank you to Doug.
Great, thank you very much, Emma. I think it absolutely, just to echo what Emma was saying about age, that at this group we often hear people coming along and sharing their stories of finding out that they've got PCA, and often that's been delayed not just because the condition is relatively uncommon or certainly under-recognised, but also because of the age you are often when you're getting some of those first symptoms. And so not only is there, do we often hear that people are facing or in contact with people who are unfamiliar with the condition and don't quite know what to do, but also because so many services and opportunities which are designed to support people living with dementia have tended to be tailored around people who are a little bit older than many of the people who are here today. And of course one of those particular issues is work, and it's something that I know Doug, we've spoken about on a number of occasions that you feel particularly passionate about. So I'll be asking Doug a few questions about work experiences today. As you're listening to Doug, we'll speak for about 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then open up for any of you to ask questions of Doug or me, or to share comments or reflections on your own experience if that's helpful for you. No obligation as always. But perhaps before we start talking about work, Doug, maybe just for those who've not met you or here at the group for the first time, maybe you just tell us a little bit about Doug Banks.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Doug Banks. I was born in the Potteries. I'm 59 years old. I've got a big birthday coming up just now. As far as my work goes, I've been working in the IT industry probably for about 30 years or more, and I worked as a software application test analyst, and I worked freelance, and I decided to in my career to try and use travel and work to get me where I wanted to go, and so I worked in many projects in the UK and abroad for many years. I met my wife Jackie, who's over here, whilst we were at the Yorkshire Bank, and later on we got married, and we continued working and so on. And it was during the time when I was working. Probably around 2013 2013, I was working for a company up in Birmingham. I was I was driving to work one morning, heading for work. I was working on a project for that was quite demanding project. I was in a key role, had lots of commitments and so on. And as I started to join the motorway to get onto the to get to work, all of a sudden, I couldn't work out which lane I should be in. It was a 5-lane motorway. It was early in the mornings, loads of traffic, and I just couldn't fathom which lane I should be in. So obviously I'd sort of got off to the slow lane, managed to get to work, got through it all, and then on the way back home the same thing occurred, and it became quite difficult. Now this lasted probably for 2 or 3 months, at which point I finished my contract, and I thought I need to go and get myself checked out. So I went to the GP, spoke about the experience, and we both agreed it's probably something to do with stress or late nights working, all that kind of thing. So that's what she suggested. It's probably stress. We can do something with that. I mean, I asked if it could be something else. Perhaps it's something else. She said, well, probably not, but if you like, I'll send you to the memory clinic. I said, what's that? Nothing wrong with the memory, I'm fine. But it turns out it's a little process they go through where you go and see a neurologist, you go and see a psychiatrist also. There are a few checks, you maybe have a scan, an MRI scan. And it turned out that after about 3 months of tests and so on, we all agreed there was nothing wrong. Everything was fine. It probably was stress. So I set about, I took some time out actually, and during that time I thought I still wasn't sure what it was, and I thought, well, maybe I'll do some cognitive behavioural therapy or something like that, or some mindfulness or something like that, something along those lines, just to see if I can help myself, And then about 18 months later, I asked to have the tests done again, just to see if there was any change. And this time round, it appeared that I'd got some atrophy at the back of my brain, and which was, at the time, was very surprising. I wasn't shocked about it so much, but I was quite surprised because I'd never heard of young dementia before. I didn't really know what it was. But what I did do, I had a euphoric moment about it, thinking finally it's something. I know what it is now, which is strange. But anyway,
so the first things that you noticed were with driving, which obviously for some people, I noticed that there was at least one person in the room who noticed changes in driving, which was their job. Key part of the
yes,
job.
yeah.
I guess for you as a freelancer, that's a key part of your
Well,
role.
getting about, travelling was because I was working.
Driving as a hobby, it's driving to get
Correct.
to work.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But in your work situation, I suppose I hear IT, and I think computers. I think lots of small text and keywords, and that certainly
Exactly,
lots of people
yeah.
in this group have had described early difficulties with using computers. What were the kind of things in your work that you noticed were becoming?
Well, the things I noticed first of all was that I was finding it difficult to. Bearing in mind I've worked in IT for so long, typing came almost like a second limb. But I found that I was getting very, very slow typing, and then got to the point where I was losing my letters. Couldn't find the letters anymore. The things were dropping out. And I thought, this can't be right. It's something wrong here. So that was one of the things, and also driving at night was difficult. Albeit it was winter time, and often you can expect that's the reason. I went and got some glasses with different lenses, sort of nighttime lenses, if you like, to see if that made any difference, and it didn't. So yeah, I was confused, and
so things like typing and letters were some of the things.
yeah, but the fact that I was getting slower and slower in terms of being able to type.
Did other people pick up on that too, or was it?
Not at first, because when I was I was actually working in a job over in Westminster there, and I declared the fact that I'd got this diagnosis of PCA, and of course no one knew what it was, and they said, well, what support do you need? You know, what do we need? I said, well, I don't really need much at this point. You know, I'm okay with it, but let's see how it goes. And as time progressed, my situation got worse in terms of my vision and perception, etc. But the thing that really made the difference was when my contract came up to be renewed, where before I would normally expect to be renewed and extended, shall we say. Now the contract was not being renewed, and I couldn't get the reason why.
I was going to say, I was wondering whether there was any open conversation about why that was the case.
Well, I did ask the question. I said, was there any reason why I can't come back? Have I done something wrong? No, we're doing something else strategic. We're going we're going into space or something. I don't know any. I've got no experience around that. So I took it that, you know, and I still can't say that was the reason why.
Yeah.
But then the next job I went for was down in Bristol for an MOD contract, and the same thing happened. I got the job, quite happy in the job, working along, still noticing a few things weren't going along, going as they should. But where the project I thought was clear for an extension, it wasn't.
Okay.
So what followed then, it happened that I was going for an eye test in December, and I went to see
neuro-ophthalmologist,
yes,
one of those. Yeah, trips off the tongue. Yeah.
And he said yes, he was aware of PCA, which is unusual, and he said, right, we're going to give you a certificate of visual impairment. So I'm now partially sighted. So when I started now to recruit for new contracts, I was very, very good at picking up contracts. I've got a lot of experience. I presented well, and when it came to the final part of the interview, where after it's all gone well, there's always a question that says, right, have you got any questions, any problems? I'd say yes. Not a problem, but I have got a visual impairment. Is that a problem? And the person would say, no, not a problem. But then I didn't get the job.
Yeah. Where
before I would expect to get that. And this was fine, occasionally I didn't get the job. But this happened probably for 24 times.
So
and
frustrating.
About 6 months down the line, I still hadn't got a job, and I was starting to, thinking, this is really becoming a problem. Now, in the meantime, I'd spoken to people from the RNIB, the National Institute of the Blind, and their advice was, well, you don't need to declare that you have dementia or that you've got a visual impairment. You can simply go and apply for the job, and if you can demonstrate that you can do the work, there should be no barrier to that. There's something called reasonable adjustments. If you have a disability or some other thing, you're entitled to have some reasonable adjustment, and it shouldn't cost the employer any money either, because there's benefits around that. But still, I couldn't get beyond that.
So you're in a particularly tough spot, because one could imagine if someone was part of a team or a business for a long period and developed these problems, then there are lots of relationships established, and one would hope that
Well,
the
yes,
employer
I
would
mean,
make adjustments. But you were finding it as a barrier to kind of getting into it because it was so
the job.
contract
I mean,
based.
The truth is, if you can get the job, there's so much support out there. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it's getting the job in the first place.
Yeah.
And as soon as you mention dementia, or you mention someone with a visual impairment or even disablement, for example, I found out that 80% of people that have a visual impairment and that have working age are not in employment.
Wow.
And that's even before we talk about dementia. Okay, so there is some kind of stigma, or I don't know whether it's just human nature. I mean, if I was a businessman, I keep thinking, if I was a businessman and a chap came along to me and said, right, you've got everything we need, but you've got a visual impairment, so I'm not sure, shall I get you or shall I get the other guy? My temptation would be always to get, I suppose human nature saying, you would always get the new guy, unless it was someone exceptional. Yeah. And I knew my job. Yeah. I'm good at the job. Who knows? I'm not exceptional enough.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
So.
So I guess it's encouraging, at least for me, to hear that despite all the difficulties you've had, you sound reasonably optimistic that, at least for some people in some situations, there is quite a lot of support out there.
Well, again, bearing in mind I was freelance, so I wasn't tied to any particular employer. Had
Absolutely.
I been employed, that would be a different situation, I think. And I'm not always aware of what other experiences other people have had.
Absolutely.
But again, I tend to think, well, if it applies to me, then the fact that I can't get a job, because for example, I've been looking for permanent work, and again, I still can't get through that barrier.
Yeah.
Really.
Okay. So I guess it may be that other people have got comments or experiences they can share in a moment about being supported in work or not. And I think the thing you mentioned about the reasonable adjustments, which is part of the Disabilities Act, what one can rightfully expect, is really key for people living with dementia who are still of working age. Yeah. What do you think could be done more to help people in your sort of situation, young people who are working, keen to work, still got lots to contribute, but with a particular set of difficulties?
Are we talking about the people that are looking for work, or for example, employers? I think that's really where the emphasis should be, is to make employers aware, that there are people out there with dementia that are fully, able to do this kind of work. Yeah. And often the adjustments are fairly minor. Yeah. And there shouldn't be a barrier there. And somehow get rid of this stigma about bringing people on and taking people on board with that. Well, that's IT particularly. We talk about IT skills. We haven't got enough of them. Well, why not employ people like
who do have those skills? Absolutely. So, given the challenge of finding new work, I know you've not just sat down quietly and withdrawn from the world. You've been fighting about. I mean, this issue of raising stigma or tackling stigma and raising awareness is something I know you've been involved in with TV interviews and radio interviews and things. Tell us something about how you've.
It's come out of really the frustration of not being able to get work. I thought, well, I'm gonna raise the awareness of it, and I'm going to get involved with that. And I initially got involved with Alzheimer's Research UK, helping PCA awareness. Yep. That sort of spread into things like doing things around other media work. One was with the Financial Times, where they did a piece on people of working age and dementia. Then I had someone come down from BBC Points West and have a chat about this rare form of Alzheimer's, and so on. And it sort of progressed now to the point where I was on a radio programme. A young lady met here last month, I think it was. Last time we had the PCA group, and we were talking about a radio show about this chap and her husband said he seemed to have what this chap was saying on the radio, and it turned out it was a lady, her husband had got PCA, and through that he went and got himself checked out, and sure enough he got a young an early diagnosis of PCA, which made it worthwhile in a sense. Yes, so that was good. But I'm sort of still on that road really.
Great.
The best thing I can say is I've got a job interview on the 10th of December.
Fantastic, fantastic.
I don't know what it'll turn into, but at least I'm still plugging away. I'm still out there looking for it. So
great for you.
Yeah.
And what advice would you give anyone else who's perhaps in your situation or still working but concerned about what the future may hold? Do you have any words of advice or from your experience?
Well, again, I think we're still a lot of work to get people to buy into the idea that people with young dementia still have a worth. Yeah. And can still work. Other than that, all I can say is to keep yourself fit and well. Keep plugging away there. Don't give up. And somewhere down the line, something will happen, and hopefully for the good.
Fantastic. Well, it's a really inspiring story, and we're really grateful for you for sharing it. And I mean, to be able to, when one does things like you've done of raising awareness through sharing your story, you don't often necessarily get to hear or see any of the results. You sort of just put it out there and hope that something will happen. So, I was very moved by the fact that the lady commented in the last meeting that she had heard a gentleman describing it and not realising she was sat next to the gentleman himself.
First time we got any feedback really was when my wife, who works at the post office, someone came in the post office and said, "Oh, I saw your man on the telly," sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we had a bit of fun over that.
Great.
But that's as good as it gets, really.
Well, Doug, thank you. We'll open the floor up to questions or comments or reflections, but for now, Doug, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody like to comment or share an experience? There's absolutely no obligation. We have a keen set of researchers keen to give you brief updates on their projects in a moment. But if anyone would like to comment on this broader theme of work, or maybe just to respond personally to what Doug's shared with us, you'd be very welcome. We have some roving microphones. If anyone, yes, let's have a comment or a question from over there.
Hello, my name's Mark Smith. I lost thread a bit there when you said about the RNIB advised you that you didn't have to tell a prospective employer.
Yeah.
So did you feel kind of morally obliged that you should, or how did you kind of play that, and how are you playing it now? If you see what I mean?
Right. Well, I did think about it, but my thoughts was, well, if I don't tell them, I feel like I'm being disingenuous. In fact, the phrase I used to say was, it's a bit like saying, "Come on, let's get married," and then once you got married, saying, "Oh, by the way, I've got 3 kids." It's not, it's not fair, is it? You can't just say, not say. I mean, it's not like you want to declare it and say, "This is me." I'm define me. I've got dementia. It's not like that. It's more that, well, you just need to be aware. I need a little bit of adjustments, but it's not a problem. That was my approach. So that's the way I had to go. I could not declare it. At the same time, I didn't want to make a big fuss over it.
Yeah.
And for me, that's still the right way to go.
And I guess it depends who the employer is and the nature of the employment. So I guess with contract work may be a bit different, but certainly with full-time employment in a lot of places, then when you apply for a job, there'd be an occupational health form, and you might declare it there, and it should be kept. So you're declaring it, but it's not influencing the interview itself, where people are evaluating your skills. But it is then considered, if you're chosen as the candidate, about how you can be supported to perform that role.
I wonder whether there's such a thing as an employer that looks for people who has a count of people where you have to have a number of people in your organisation that has a disability. I don't know whether, like government places where they have, you're meant to employ a number of people from ethnic minorities or something like that. whether do something along those lines. I don't know, but
Mm.
maybe that's one way to go as well.
Sure. And if you happen to be an employment lawyer, you never know with these groups. There's always someone. Well, I'm very confident. There's always someone sat in the room who knows much more about whatever we're talking about than I do. But if you're sat there on any information and would like to comment, please do, and correct anything you've heard. Thank you, Mark, for your comment. Anyone else? Yes, sorry. Charlie Harrison has a comment.
Yeah, well, we have our first ever question from a live stream, actually.
Ah, great. Far away.
So someone said, how much does stress play a part in this? The question is, how much does stress have to do with the development of this? My husband was a chemist and experienced the same issues and then had issues with calculations. His job was very stressful.
Well, stress was part of it. In fact, the stress is coming from the fact that you can't do things as quickly. For example, when I was working over in Westminster, they're working at such a pace. When you go to a meeting, for example, you don't go there with a pad and a pencil. You go there with a laptop, and you're making notes as you're reading, as you're listening to the meeting, and as you leave the meeting, all your work is done. Okay, and then off you go, and well, for me, I couldn't even do that. I had to record the meeting, and then write it down, and then put it on a computer type of thing.
So coping with the nature of your challenges induced.
I couldn't keep up, and that gave me the stress because I couldn't keep up with that.
Yeah.
So.
And I think we know that there are some risk factors and triggers for people noticing their first symptoms of different forms of dementia, but aside from the kind of whether it kind of causes it, I think that's also it's one of the main cruelties that so many people describe in their stories here and in other places of this sort of subtle, insidious onset of something being not quite right, but it's not like it comes on overnight. It's not like a stroke where there's a clear change from how things were to how things are now. And so many people are left with uncertainty for often quite a protracted period about, is it something wrong, or was I just tired, or did I just have a headache, or there's so many other explanations, and sadly that's often what delays the diagnosis for so long. You sort of have to wait for things to get worse or more difficult on a more regular basis before you can make a clear statement about whether something is changing or not. Yeah, but thank you for the question. Yes, please, at the front here. Sorry.
My wife's experience of PCA and employment. The first diagnosis was burnout, and this was in around 2011. Now there had been some signs of this actually in the previous 4 or 5 years, and that had involved driving and getting a bit confused. But not terribly mad, but noticeable. However, when she was a gynecologist and a consultant gynecologist, and she'd been working out in the Middle East and very successfully, but things weren't going quite so well. She came back, and the diagnosis of burnout was very definite. So her way of coping with this was she decided she would do locums, whatever lower level. So she decided not to operate, and that she could look after the patients, she could look after them. Now at that stage she could certainly go, and her knowledge still of gynecological matters is totally intact.
Absolutely.
So in that sense she was entirely safe in what she was doing. So the point I'm making here, Don, is that it may be possible for people, yes, to admit if the diagnosis can be made early enough. In this case the diagnosis wasn't made, but something else was the matter, or thought to be the matter. So people perhaps can continue employment, but accept that they need work at a lower level. And I think this might help people.
Absolutely, thank you. I think that's a really helpful comment, and it chimes with a lot of other experiences we've heard of in this group and in other conversations where people have adapted their role and found that fruitful, continuing, enjoyable, meaningful employment and contribution can be made for some time to come. It's not an all or none. And again, one of the stereotypes, one of the problems that hopefully is gradually changing is this notion that dementia means you can't do anything, everything's lost. Of course, it's nonsense. Things have become more challenging, but many things are preserved. And so that gradual subtlety of understanding how we can continue to support people in many different situations, not just in work, I think is really, really important. Jackie, did you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that they've tried so many different types of jobs, because obviously all of a sudden we had no income coming in, we had to sell the house, everything changed in one split second, it felt like. As soon as we got the diagnosis, Doug couldn't pick up the contracts. What we were doing, he was successful in the interviews as soon as he said what he had, but then he realised he couldn't work at that level maybe still, so he tried different levels. Even went and tried somewhere just to do packing, just to earn some money, and it was unsuccessful. He just got no's every time. So I don't really know. I just don't feel there's any support out there. I don't feel there's any support for young people. There's nothing now. The doctors don't know anything. Even our doctors still now, when we go, we've not seen her for a few months, we go back and she'll say, oh, have you read up on this? And Doug will say, well, I can't read. So even the slightest thing I find very hurtful, because she hasn't really taken into account what PCA means. That Doug he can't read, he can't write, he can't do calculations, he can't use money, he can't cook. It really is debilitating. But the thing is, his mind, all the knowledge is still there. So it might be, you might need a computer where you can speak into it, so instead of typing. None of the employees seem to take that into account, that we can still use that, because Doug, as you can hear, Doug can still speak very well. His knowledge is still on inside. Everything about IT still could literally do. It's just the fact that you would maybe need to slightly slower pace. With voice recognition, but to this day there's nothing like this.
Yeah. And no, that's really great, and we absolutely, there isn't enough support out there, but it's the fact that, as you mentioned, as you concluded at the end there, that there are possibilities, and that if they can be encouraged, if we can raise awareness, and if people can see. Obviously, one of the early attendees of the group was Terry Pratchett, and what difficulty other than PCA could be more troublesome to an author than the ability to spell and write, but through support, obviously, in someone who had someone to support him, then it was possible to keep going. So there are lots of difficult situations like the one you found yourselves in, but others, I think.
Just a thought, Seb. Are there any jobs going into UCL?
You're very welcome to have my job if you like. Yeah. Just mindful of time. Thank you so much for Doug once again, and Jackie, and everyone else who's asked questions. I'm going to hand back over to Emma now, who's going to introduce some of the researchers from the group. But in the meantime, one more round of applause for Doug, please.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to have a brief update from some of our research team about the projects they're currently doing, why they're important, what they're doing, and how you can get involved if you're interested. So it's the 4 people I'm talking about kind of head to the front here and have a seat behind the panel. This will be quite brief, but they'll be around if you want to ask questions for us afterwards. And the purpose of the research forums is really so that if you are a bit interested, we can get in touch and tell you more and find out about what you might like to be involved in. I'm not sure there's one per person, so if you've got a spare, please leave it on your chair in case someone else needs it. But if you haven't been able to register your interest, you can let me know on your way out. Okay, so I think Roberta, you were going to tell us first about the retrospective impact study.
Okay. Well, as many of you may know, just about a year ago, we were awarded a £3.65 million grant to study the impact of multi-component support groups for those living with rare dementias. This is basically an international study because we have people working with us from Nipissing University, which is Northern Ontario in Canada, Wales at Bangor University, as well as UCL. And the primary part of this is there is no such research out there right now on this, so it's a very, very important study. And the biggest thing in this is we are going to be using a lot of new people to interview. Where's that's coming from? I didn't touch anything. So there's different work streams within the study. One of those is a retrospective cohort study, and that's actually where we're asking for people like you to volunteer from within all of our rare dementia support groups. So not only the persons living with the rare dementia, but carers and partners or friends. And we're trying to take a look back at what's happened with you, how things have progressed, how you're using these support groups, what impact they've had, and maybe what else we can do to further that along. We're also going to be coming up with some theories of change, ideas for making things different to maybe improve your situations. There will be one where we're working on a development measure, and that's to measure resilience, which is really to say, how are you feeling, how are you getting along in this process of living with dementia, and are you okay, or what can we do to make that better, hopefully. There's the longitudinal study is actually one where part of the people that we're hoping to interview within the first 1,000 members is taking some of those people and interview again over 24 to 48 months. So it will, extend. It's not a one-time thing for some people. We're also looking at some special interventions that we can come up with, and a lot of these may be online things. We started out trying to do this with the FTD cares, but that may extend to some of the other rare dementias as well. And then we're also going to look at some economics of other things. So those are the main work streams that we're going on. So what we're looking for is people who want to get involved. And as Emma said, we've got some forms here if you'd like to take those to be involved. The other thing you can do is you can send an email to research@raredementiasupport.org. And that will get you to the people on the team, and they will be in contact with you because we really do want to do these interviews. A lot of those interviews will be either, some of them might be here, but a lot of them could be done where you're in your own home. We would do them electronically through an online program. So the recorder, we can take care of your information. There'll be some online programs for developing and testing that you can be involved in some of the activities with that. We have some exciting creative activities we're working on. One that we've done as a study team, we've done a couple of times now, is research poetry, which is, I won't go into what that is, but it's a lot of fun too. And then creating the development measures. So there's a lot of things going on. We've got 4 years left to go. We've been doing a lot of planning over this last year, and we're hoping that these interviews will start probably in January. So if you are interested, please come and see anybody on the team or send an email to research@raredementiasupport.org.
And then next up we have Dia.
Hi, my name is Dilek, and I'm a researcher and PhD student. And I will give you a very snappy presentation of the study that we have ongoing right now, called, should say, ultra high resolution MRI study in PCA and typical Alzheimer's disease. Why are we doing this study? So there are a couple of reasons. To really understand Alzheimer's disease, we need to know how it changes the small structures of the brain. And at the moment, that can only be done either by doing post-mortem studies or by using methods that are invasive, like, for example, lumbar punctures or MRIs that use ionizing dye. However, there are now much stronger MRI scanners out there. And because they are stronger, they can produce images of the brain of much greater detail. And we are asking, can we use these MRI scanners to understand more about Alzheimer's disease? Can we use them to understand how Alzheimer's disease changes the small structures of the brain? Can we use them to see if we can actually see the protein associated with Alzheimer's disease called amyloid in the living brain without using invasive methods? MRI scanners to understand more about the relationship between changes of the brain related to Alzheimer's disease and the symptoms. And if we can do this, and I'm not saying we can, because that's what we're going to look at, but if we can do this, then that would or could actually change the way we diagnose Alzheimer's disease. But it would, for example, decrease the burden on the patients, and it could also tell us more about the different types of dementias, how they're related, how are they different, how are they the same. And the two types that we're looking at are typical Alzheimer's disease and posterior cortical atrophy. Participation would involve 3 visits. 2 of them would be to London and 1 of them would be to Oxford. During the first visit, we would kind of just introduce the study again, take consent, and we would do some neuropsychological assessments. And we would also create a custom-made mouthguard for each participant, and I'll get to the mouthguard in a bit. In the second visit, that's also in London, we would do another session of neuropsychological assessments and the first MRI scan. And this first MRI scan would be done on a conventional 3T scan that is now routinely used for research and also clinical purposes. And then the third visit, which is in Oxford, and during that third visit we would do 2 scans, and these 2 scans would be on this ultra high resolution scanner called 7D, with a break in the middle. So the mouthguard, what is that? So for this study, this is also a very quite new thing. We're making custom-made mouthguards for each participant. These mouthguards are small and they just clip into the front teeth, a bit like what people use when they play rugby maybe, but smaller than that probably. And it's done very quickly, it's done by a dentist, and the reason we're doing this is because MRI scanners are very sensitive to movement. And anyone who's had an MRI scanner before knows that they have to lie still or as still as possible, because any small movement can sometimes cause blurring in the images, and the blurring makes it really difficult to analyze the images, and if the blurring is quite bad, sometimes the images cannot be used. So this mouthguard is a special thing, and what it does is it actually tracks the movement that a participant might make in a scanner. It sends that information to a camera, which is also inside the scanner, and the camera then sends the information to the computer, and we try to fix the blurring as it's happening if there is any blurring. And so that's it. And I was going to stay afterwards to kind of have a chat with anyone who might be interested, but unfortunately I have to leave because we're running a study visit for this study right now. But if you are interested, please speak to anyone on the team and they will let me know. Thank you.
So hi everybody. So my name's Keir, and I'm very fortunate to know a lot of the people here today. For those who don't know me, I've been working on the PCA study at University College London along with Seb for the last 9 years. Before going on to the project that I'm going to outline, I'd like to give a recent update where a couple of weeks back I was elected to Alzheimer's Association's Executive Committee for Atypical Alzheimer's Disease. So for those who aren't familiar, some people might consider posterior cortical atrophy to be the most common atypical presentation of Alzheimer's disease. I think a reason why this is quite exciting is because the Atypical Alzheimer's Disease Committee has really been key in enabling really the increase in awareness and understanding of posterior cortical atrophy. So some of their major outputs include enabling the largest study of PCA to date. So this involved 300 people with PCA who volunteered blood samples at centres across the world to get a better understanding of the risk factors of PCA, as well as developing the first multi-centre consensus classification criteria for posterior cortical atrophy. So before the consensus criteria, clinical criteria for posterior cortical atrophy were largely based off the expertise of individual centres, and this could mean that different centres might mean slightly different things when talking about PCA. And just this year, we put out the largest longitudinal study of posterior cortical atrophy. So this is looking at the changes of PCA symptoms over time. But in terms of the context of this particular study, which I'm funded by the Alzheimer's Society to conduct, while clearly we have a long way to go in terms of different professional groups being aware of PCA, there is an increase in people being familiar with PCA but referring to it as the visual form of dementia. But unfortunately, this is a bit of an oversimplification in that we know that for a lot of symptoms of PCA, they're not strictly speaking visual. Now, these can range from difficulties with people missing things that are right in front of them, to people who might have difficulties locating the sleeves of a jacket behind themselves while dressing, or have difficulty being confident of where a light switch is in their bedroom at night time. And so the reason I'm conducting this research is an understanding, well, what are the optimal conditions of the environment and how to present objects to enable people to reliably reach for objects that are right in front of them. And if we could go on to the next slide. And also getting an understanding of what combinations of sensory information are optimal in supporting our sense of spatial awareness. Now, some people may have noticed that over the last 12 months, I've actually been touring a lot of the PCA Support Group meetings, not just in the London area, but around the country, to get an idea about really people's experiences of some of these less intuitive symptoms, these disturbances in sense of space, and really how to manage some of these symptoms by making use of people's residual strengths in terms of what sensory systems are better preserved. So for people who would like to hear more of this study, that's my email address. In terms of participation, it involves a visit to Queen Square, which is about a 10 to 15-minute walk away from here, and also me visiting people at home. And I'll be asking people to conduct a series of exercises involving them reaching to different objects and, for example, adjusting their posture or their body orientation. Thank you.
Finally, on to Emily. Hello everyone, for those of you who haven't said hello to yet today and who haven't met me yet, my name is Emily Brotherhood. I'm a research psychologist at the Dementia Research Centre. And I'm here just to speak about a study called Play It Again, which is part of my PhD work. I'm coming to the end of recruiting, so this study runs to the end of January, so I'm looking for a handful of participants living with PCA who may be interested in taking part in a study about music. So what this study is, it's a one-off visit to Queen Square, which lasts for about 4 hours. And the main aim of the study is to see if we can ascertain different physical responses to music. So looking at how your body responds in more subtle ways when you listen to music that you either know or might be new to you, or that you like or dislike. So what the visit would actually involve is, first off, I would be asking you questions, background health questions, and the kinds of music that you like to listen to, if you play a musical instrument, just kind of get an idea of your experience and engagement with music so far. And then I would be fitting discrete sensors like the one that you can see on the screen as a wristband. So essentially this is like a sort of fancy Fitbit or fitness tracker, which tracks things like your heart rate and the temperature of the surface of your skin. And so while these are passively sort of just recording, doing my thing in the background, I'll be playing you clips of music, while the camera looks at the position of your pupils as you listen to those clips as well. So I'm looking at multiple ranges of things, collecting data on lots of different aspects of your body's subtle physical responses. After each piece of music, I'd ask you just to simply tell me if you know the piece, if you like it, and if it evokes a memory. And then afterwards, I take the devices off, have an hour-long lunch break, and then we do some psychology pen and paper tasks, just where we sit at a desk, and I'll be asking you to do lots of different tasks that look at a range of thinking skills. So the reason that I'm doing this is that with PCA, as I'm sure many of you are aware in the room, I don't need to say that there is a lot of difficulty potentially with things that involve visual cues. And music does seem to be an activity which, because it relies obviously on listening, can still be an activity that I know many of you told me you still enjoy. So it seems that we want to find out as much as we can about music and how people with PCA and typical memory like Alzheimer's disease, how you respond to the music in a physical way, so that then potentially I wouldn't have to rely on language for you to communicate your music preferences to me. So it's really about getting a more sophisticated idea of people's music tastes and preferences and how people with PCA engage with music. So if you're interested in taking part, I'll be here at the end of the meeting as well, just standing at the back of the room, so if you'd like to come and chat more or have any questions, then please do get in touch. Thank you. And if we can have a round of applause for all our I just think it's really encouraging that there's such a mix of things going on and a number of different ways to get involved. That's really exciting to see. So now it's just for me to say thank you for coming, especially those who have come along for the first time. I hope you've had a wonderful hour and enjoyed the day. Just also to save the date for the next meeting, which will be on Friday the 24th of April 2020. And I hope to see you again then, and that will be here as well. But also just to flag that even though we run these big meetings, we are here, the direct support team, so Nikki and Claire and Olivia, who you met earlier, they're here between meetings, so if you have queries, questions, things you need help wanted to flag up that there is a guide published by, obviously, lots of implications for health and social care, and there is a guide, an election guide published by the Royal Society of Public Health. I didn't have time to add it to the slide, but if anyone's interested in reading, well, there's lots of questions and answers in there, which may be helpful. And yeah, just to thank you all on behalf of us for making the journey today